Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us Season 1, Episode 6. It is called Kin. So full spoilers for the episode as always. This is probably my favourite of the episodes so far. And that may be surprising because it's not an action-packed episode. There's no clickers or anything like that. It is purely character drama, is the characters bonding. But my favourite thing about Last of Us in general is the Ellie and Joel relationship. It's their storyline, it's their bonding and how that develops and grows. And this episode was a big episode for that. It was full of milestones in their relationship, and frankly my favorite scene from the game is in this part of the story. It's in this episode, and it means a lot to me, that scene, and I'll talk about why in a little bit. But this obviously follows the tragedy of Henry and Sam, and we skip 3 months later. We actually replay a scene from the last episode before we get going in this one. And probably quite wisely, they start off with a very light and funny scene with the old couple in their little cabin, which, you know, it doesn't do too much, but it further reestablishes kind of how far Joel and Ellie have come, where she's kind of defying him, even though the first rule he told her was to always do what he says, and she's breaking it constantly because she's a kid and that's what they do. But the way Ellie was bouncing off these characters as well as Joel in the scene was a lot of fun. If anything, when I said a few episodes ago that I missed Ellie interacting with Bill, that was the one downside to what they did with Bill's story in the show, which was otherwise fantastic, but that was the one casualty, is we didn't get Ellie and Bill together. I feel like I got a little bit of that with Ellie and this old guy. There was just, I mean, he didn't have the same character as Bill by any means from the games, but certainly the way they were bouncing off of each other gave me just a little bit of that vibe of this like third party coming in and like kind of clashing with Ellie, just a little bit. Him calling her a little psychopath, I thought was quite amusing. But yeah, the episode, it moves at a steady pace. It deals with all these moments between Joel and Ellie that show that they are bonding, they are getting closer. You know, there's the scenes early on, right after this, where they're at the campfire and they're talking about what they would like to do. Like, after this is all over, Ellie brings up the subject. She's the optimist, obviously, between the two, because Joel would never bring this up. But she's saying, what would you like to do after all this is over? And notably, she says, what are we going to do? And he kind of catches on to that and criticizes it a little bit, and she changes to I. But it's notable that she just kind of rolls through it. She's like, okay, all right, Joel, you're being Joel, and you're correcting that, but, you know, she still meant it. And, you know, he talks about wanting to be a sheep farmer and have a ranch. And she talks about wanting to be an astronaut and looking up at the moon, and how that was like the one cool thing to look at in the QZ, because, you know, it's nothing but walls and barricades and stuff like that. You know, you could look up, but you could see the moon and dream. And it's something that she dreams of, but can never really do, because this world isn't obviously in a position to be sending anyone to the moon. I'm pretty sure the NASA program has seen better days than the post-apocalypse. But, you know, this was a bit of sharing and a bit of insight into the two characters, and I really, obviously there's parts of this that I recognize from the games. The idea that Ellie likes space and wants to be an astronaut is something that comes up in the game, so it was sweet to see that kind of come out of her a little bit. But the bigger thing here with this sort of pair of scenes is that Joel says, you know, he's going to take watch, because Ellie says, do you want me to take first watch or second? You know, the idea to take turns standing guard whilst the other sleeps. And Joel says, I'll take both. And this is kind of a callback, of course, to the start of episode 4? No, actually, maybe in episode 3, or maybe in the start of the Bill episode, where they're camping and he ends up standing guard all night instead of sleeping. And here, though, he falls asleep. He wakes up the next morning and he panics for a second, and then it turns out that it's okay. Ellie has it covered, right? She woke up, saw he was asleep, grabbed the rifle, and stood guard, and did it the way that he taught her. And I think this is a very important moment for their relationship, because it's this kind of like idea that Joel's maybe not accepted yet, that is that he kind of needs Ellie to take care of him to an extent, as maybe not as much as she needs him, right? Quite yet, but back when episode 1 we talked about how Sarah was kind of taking care of him. There was all these little things that he wouldn't do for himself that she would fill in. You know, she would fill in the gaps and balance him out in the same way that any like pair of like people or characters, whether it be, you know, a parent and a kid or a romantic relationship or whatever, that they fill each other out. In like, you know, if someone's a little too cynical, the other one will be a bit more optimistic, and it kind of balances things out, right? That's a simplification of it, but that's kind of, you know, what we're getting at. But there's this idea here that he thinks he has to always be the one protecting. He has to be the one to look after her, that he can't fail. And she's like, no, I did it. I'm capable. I did what you taught me. And he still doesn't like concede. He still says, next time, wake me up. But he gives her a little nod. I thought that was a really, just a nice pair of scenes that show that she is learning, that he's not quite trusting of that yet, but he's accepting that, you know, and obviously the other part of this episode that it gets into, which is actually a little bit new to the show versus the games, is that he is starting to slow down. He is getting a little old. He's not as good as he used to be. Obviously we had the panic attack a little bit earlier. I'm saving that. I'll talk about it when we get to the bigger one later. But this idea that like he can't just be this Superman on his own anymore, and that he kind of needs someone to watch his back, and in some level he does need her as well. I thought this was a really great couple of scenes to show that. And similarly, again, comparing it to the previous episodes, when they're walking the next day and they're looking for the river to cross, and they're talking about various things. Whistling was one of them. I think a couple of things came into conversation. But Joel is engaging in the conversation now. He does make a crack here or there about her never shutting up. You know, he does that at the campfire. But he's now engaging in the conversation. He's accepting that this is what she's like. And he's explaining things, right? It's compared to, again, towards the end of the episode, when they've bonded even more, where not only is he engaging in the conversation later on, he's flat out enjoying the conversation. He's smiling, you know, when they're on the horseback later in the episode. So it works in two ways as a comparison to what it was like before, when she tried to ask questions and he would be like, do you ever shut up? He wouldn't want to answer them. It was a big deal when he did give her one little answer at the start of the Bill episode. And here, it's a way to connect back to that, but also set up the comparison for later. So because it's set up here at the start of the episode, and it's reminding us of this, where they are now in the relationship, it means something later when it goes even more heartwarming, when it becomes even more of a pleasant experience for them. Arguably, it already is for her, but it's more reciprocated by the end of the episode. So just a simple little thing, to compare from the start and the end of the episode to show you that there has been a change. You don't necessarily need to, but it's a nice little thing to do it with. I did enjoy her joke when they see the dam, and she just goes, damn. I thought that was funny. That was a classic Ellie joke. I've full support of it. I love it. I love it. So obviously a group of horseback riders come out. Having played the game, I know, I'm suspecting this is just them condensing down to, this is people from Jackson, and knowing from like images like who the actress was that was going to play Maria, I could tell that one of them was her. So, you know, it was kind of like clear where it was going, but they're testing to see if they're infected with their dog, who can sniff it out. And Joel and Ellie genuinely don't know if she's going to like test, you know, quote unquote positive with this test, because it's not like a scientific reader of any kind. It's just a dog smelling something. Will she still have the smell even though she's immune and it's in her system? Or, well, you know, is it just like, nah, there was no chance. And it plays it for this really tense moment, which became more relevant for me later. I think in the moment I thought it was fine as a nice little tense sequence to sort of like build the suspense of, oh, are these people dangerous? Are they going to be in a bind here? But I liked it even more when Joel brought up later and talked about kind of what was going through his head in this moment, and how helpless he felt. And you do feel that in the moment itself, don't get me wrong, but I think when Joel actually has his monologue later, it made it even better. So they get to Jackson, which is where Tommy is, and Tommy's here. He's using his construction know-how to help sort of maintain the place. Obviously, it's a valuable skill set to have in this post-apocalypse. And this is when so back in episode like 1 and 2, when we were talking about Joel wanting to find Tommy to help him and save him because he thinks he's in trouble, one of the thoughts I had that I might have brought up or I might have left off because it was too spoilery was the idea that maybe how will Joel react when he sees that without Joel, Tommy's achieved a better world for himself than with Joel. And the idea that Jackson is kind of the most perfect version of civilization that we've found in this world as of yet. It's not like the QZ where there's this kind of like semi-fascist or fully fascist regime that are kind of in control of it. It's this very communal, happy place where everyone sticks up for each other and pitches in. It's not meant to be a violent place. They'll fend off, obviously, violent people from the outside, and they mentioned that with the dead bodies, but this was very much like, no, this is a dream that maybe Joel didn't think was attainable. And I was thinking early on in the show, I was thinking about how, Joel's determined to get to Tommy, and one of the themes that obviously keep coming up is this idea of having that one person that you protect. And up until this episode, on some level, Joel still thought that was Tommy, that he was going to protect Tommy, and he's maybe not accepted that it's kind of switched to Ellie. And there's obviously a few things go into that. One is that Tommy is obviously a very capable grown-ass man who doesn't need it in the same way that maybe he once did, that he's kind of found his own way to survive in a way that's healthier than with Joel around. But just in general, like, how's Joel going to take that? So I was very anticipating this meeting and like them reuniting and how it was going to go, particularly in the show, because it's good in the game, but I was particularly excited in the show because they kind of really stirred up the idea that he wanted to get to Tommy to protect him, whereas in the game he just wanted to get to Tommy because like Tommy might know where the Fireflies are to unload Ellie, right? It was all about unloading Ellie. He was not going to find Tommy because he was concerned that Tommy needed him. That's actually an addition in the show, and one that I think works really well with the themes that they've been playing with, and is already in the game, of characters wanting to protect that one person, and that gives them purpose, and they've got a fear of failing to protect that person. Those ideas, obviously, it fits perfectly with that. So that's actually a really nice change that they added into the show. So I'm saying all this because every single little moment that these actors share between each other once he arrives at Jackson was captivating to me. Like there's like a 20-30 minute period in the middle of this episode where every single little glance was keeping me in the edge of my seat. Simple little things of Ellie looking jealous might not be the right word, but she has this look on her face when Joel hugs Tommy, and it's almost like it's the first time she's seen Joel with someone that he cares about since she's become attached to him. Obviously, he was attached to Tess more than her when they met, but they've been on this journey since then. We've had this 3-month time jump, and they've been through this turmoil where they've saved each other, and she looks like almost scared that now that Joel's got his brother, that does he need her anymore? And you can see that in Ramsey's performance in the scene. It's so good. And she's even scared to like not be around Joel. A couple of scenes later, when Joel and Tommy are going to go talk to each other in private, and she's like, hey, wait a minute, like, and she tries to sort of dispute that she wants to leave Joel, and he's like, no, you'll be fine, go off. And not in a mean way, but like, she feels like she's been unloaded in that moment, and you can sense that again in her performance, that she's scared that the one person she's confided in, that she feels that she is attached to, might in some way, like, there's this fear of being abandoned, which again obviously comes up later in the episode. So that was fantastic. Obviously you have Maria kind of giving Joel some side eye because she's clearly been told everything that Joel's done in the past by Tommy. We find out obviously Tommy and her are married. There's a great little moment when they're having food, where there's another girl watching Ellie. It's a fun moment because obviously Ellie's very different to all the kids in here. There's something else I want to say about this later, but I'll save that for the post like game spoiler wall. Just in terms of something that's maybe foreshadowing for much later. But the idea that Ellie is this wisecracking, swearing character, and that she even has a weapon, and we don't necessarily blame Joel for that, I don't think. In the world that they are in and they've been traveling through, it kind of makes sense on some level why she does need a weapon, and I think the show is like done, sold as that well. I think, and there's a moment here where it feels like Maria specifically is judging Joel for like giving her a weapon and let her have a weapon. And I feel like in the moment, I think we as the audience side with Joel because we're like, hey, wait a minute. Like, yeah, in the normal world, like you'd have a point, but we're in The Last of Us right here. I don't know if this quite holds up. And this idea, of course, that Ellie's had to grow up in a way very quickly that a lot of the other kids haven't, and that these last few months have really aged her in certain ways. Not in every way. She's still very much a kid in a lot of ways, in the way she talks, and a lot of the ideas and hopes she has. Her reactions to things are still kid-like at times. But she's absolutely had to grow up quickly in other ways to just deal with the world around her and survive. So, really, really good stuff. Yeah. So, Joel's just staring daggers. We had to come almost like a repeat of that joke from episode 5 from last week, where Ellie tells Joel to say something and then he says it, but it sounds kind of like evil when he says it because he's pissed. That was also entertaining. I also really enjoyed Tommy having this weird moment of realization that he's effectively a communist now, because that was a very dirty word in the old world, and his entire worldview, he's this guy from Texas who is like, because Joel says, so you're basically a communist, and he's like, nah, it's not like that, and Maria's like, no, actually that's exactly what this is. Maybe it makes him rethink what he thought of that word from before, I would expect. But yeah, so we see this thriving town. We see this town that has a Christmas tree up, right? They've got a bar. That's where Joel and Tommy go. So I enjoyed all the different reactions when they were all together before. Obviously here we get Joel and Tommy one-on-one. Joel lies about Tess and lies about exactly why they're there. But there's a lot of like things to read into this conversation, which is that Joel, but even before this scene, there's a great little moment actually that I've skipped over, where like Ellie says something like, "Oh, this is much better than I think they're talking about where they're going to put them to stay. Right? So, there's a house that's free. We'll give you that house, which is nice of them. May I add, we've got a whole house free for you, but." They say, but it's not much, but it's got heat, it'll be great or whatever. And Ellie says, oh yeah, it's much better than we've had much worse these last few months. And Joel turns very sharply and says, we've been doing just fine. It does kind of feel like he's trying to like he's seeing the world that his brother's got now, and he's trying to sort of like. It's not a dick measuring contest. I don't think it is that at all. I think it's this idea that Joel feels like his brother needed him. That's what he felt before. And he's got here just to find that not only does he not need him, he is thriving without him. He has a world. He has sheep. He's going to have bacon soon. He's got Christmas trees up. They have all these comforts of the old world. And he did it all without him, and I think on some level he wants to show that he's doing okay too. It's kind of like when you run into an old friend or someone you've not seen in a long time, and you don't want to just admit that your life's been shit because you don't want pity or something like that. There's a little bit of that going on, I suppose, but I think this stark realization that Tommy doesn't actually really need him to save him. And Tommy's very nice about it. Tommy gives him the drink and says thanks for still caring about me and whatever. And I love that Joel expects Tommy to come with them to this Firefly base that's at the university in Colorado, right? That's where he finds out they need to go. And Tommy doesn't want to go. And immediately Joel says, oh, because your wife won't let you. And he sounds like such a little whiny bitch. He sounds so petty. He sounds like so unlikable. And I think what's so smart about this episode is that this is easily the most likable and vulnerable Joel's going to be as a whole. Not this moment, obviously. This comment's very, very coming from a place of hurt. But I think you empathize with where it's coming from. You don't necessarily sympathize, but you understand where it's coming from. And then when obviously he has his breakdown a little bit later, you get a lot of these things. But the big thing though is that Tommy says, "No, I'm not going because I'm going to be a dad." He says, Maria's pregnant and he can't leave. He has to be more careful. Joel's, just silent reaction to this is again wonderful. This is striking a chord because his whole backstory hinges on the fact that he lost his daughter, and he can't really argue with the idea that Tommy wants to be there to protect his future children and be a father. He can't. Like, there's no part of him that can argue against that. Obviously, he says the shitty thing where Tommy says, I think I might make a good dad, and Joel says, I guess we'll see. And Tommy reacts kind of appropriately, gets a little upset, and says, just because your life ended doesn't mean mine did. And it's notable that Joel walks out and has another panic attack sort of moment here. He thinks he sees his daughter, Sarah, in the crowds, very similar hair, and obviously she turns around and it's not her. But it's a really good moment, but I think what's really notable about this in the earlier scene where he has his panic attack after they leave the cabin is that both of them kind of come like right after where he's kind of like challenged in a way. Like in the scene in the cabin, there's the idea that, if your brother's out that direction, he's probably dead, right? And that does scare him. And then I think here, he's ultimately, again, he's scared. Like, these panic attack moments are coming in very understandable places right after he's been challenged with a piece of information that's going to scare him. And this being confronted of, like, how he is because of the death of his daughter, and he does kind of live like there's no chance of a real world again. Like, and if you compare it to just, like, how people react in, like, mourning, right? The idea that someone loses someone close to them, and it feels like the world's ended. And that eventually, through grieving and through time, you eventually come back and you can live a normal life again. But for Joel, the world did literally end when Sarah died. It literally changed fundamentally, and the post-apocalyptic sense of the word, it ended. And Tommy took a lot of time, admittedly, but Tommy has kind of built the regular world again. Not the entire thing, obviously, but for his world. It's there. It's a symbol that he has healed, that he has moved on, that he's accepted the bad things have done in the past, and he's trying to be better. And Joel has never kind of accepted that was a possibility. Like someone who is grieving who never gets over it, he's never accepted that they could have, like, this happy future. And that kind of ties in again to Ellie asking, like, what do you want to do when all this is over? And he, brings up the sheep, right? And I think it's very notable as well that when they're being shown around this place, we see sheep. And Ellie's like, hey, look, Joel, sheep. And it's almost like a stark, like, stab to him that when he said that earlier, it was purely just, like, hypothetical. He didn't believe it was ever really possible. And then he's been presented with it in Jackson. Here it is. Here's the thing you said that you wanted to do that was your dream for living out the rest of your days. Here it is in living color. I think that, like, he has to almost no-sell it in his reaction, and he tries to kind of just sort of, like, brisk past it. He probably almost feels belittled that like, his brother and this group of people have achieved the thing that he sort of threw out there, saying as if, that would be great, but, it's probably never happening. And I think in Joel's mind, his dream was just as attainable pretty much as what Ellie's was with the astronaut. But in reality, no. Like, she's dreaming beyond because she's a kid, and that makes sense. She's dreaming further than realistically she's probably ever going to be able to go. Joel, on the other hand, threw out something that is attainable but thought the same thing about, and it kind of shows his worldview and his cynicism. But yeah, honestly, everything with Joel and Tommy in this I thought was exceptional. Everything with Joel and Ellie I thought was exceptional. We're not even done, but I just, like, even at this moment in the episode, I was already kind of floored with how well their playing off of each other was. And I love that it wasn't this big fight. It wasn't, like, getting angry. It would have been so easy to have Tommy, like, start yelling about, you put me through all these miserable things and you made me kill people. And he's not. He's very collected. He understands why it went down, and he understands that he also played a part in it. It's like, we did these things and we could have done other things, but we weren't good at them. So this is the path that I agreed to go down with you. But fundamentally, like, I want to, do this now. I want to move away from that. I want to be better. I want to evolve or whatever fruity sort of, like, dialogue you want to put onto, like, this. But regardless, he's not just pissed at Joel and yelling and blaming him. Maria kind of does a little bit, and I think Maria's a little bit judgmental in that sense. Don't get me wrong, I think Maria comes across as a very sensible character, and her conversation with Ellie's great. I think, the only, like, thing that strikes the audience, I think, for Maria being or saying something that feels wrong is her judgment of Joel. And it's not, and that's the beauty of it, is that she's not entirely wrong either. Like, I think in some level, like everything we've heard about Joel, and we feel like we were getting the hint that Joel's capable of, and like the fact that Tommy did just kind of cut ties with them and not call him on the radio suggests that no, there's some truth to this. Like there is some truth to that he might be a bad guy, and that's a question that's came up. Is like, if you just because you've done some bad things, are you a bad person? In this very episode, the comment comes up of like, just because you have a bad reputation doesn't mean you're actually bad. But maybe in Joel's case, there is some level of truth to it. I think what's fascinating to me, like knowing the whole story, is that I think my stance on Joel as a character, which I won't even remotely give away here because we're not at the end of the story yet, is altered and shifted a little bit back and forth each time I've played the game, and now with the show adding these extra layers onto it, especially this idea that he's getting older and he's not as good as he used to be, and he's not just I think it makes sense in the video game that he is kind of like this, like almost John Wick level, like badass who can take on hordes of enemies because it's a video game. But in a TV show, it's a bit more grounded, it's a bit more real, and he is kind of struggling. You know, we see him have these panic attacks. He's a little older. He mentions being a bit deaf, you know, later on. All these little things are kind of piling up. And adding to him feeling inadequate, like he can't offer anything. And of course he can. If he just moved into Jackson here with his brother, like, you know, he was in construction. He worked with his brother before. That skill, on top of just being good at, you know, being a guard and stuff, because he's, you know, good with the weapons and he's been surviving for all this time. Like, he has a very good, diverse set of experience and skills that he can utilize in a town like this, if he could just let himself be normal and sort of move on in the world. And that's something that, given his relationship with Tess, we know he never really did. You know, Tess's line was, you never, you know, felt about me like I did about you. And I think that sort of speaks to him just never letting himself truly move on from his old life. Like, the world ended when his daughter died, and it's still over. So he's very cynical about anyone who's trying to rebuild it, because he just doesn't believe it's possible. But maybe Ellie, in some way, will prove to him that it can be, that there is a future, that there is hope, that there is an idea of, you know, the future. She's this little beacon of hope in his life, potentially. Even though it scares him, obviously, because it's someone to lose. It's someone that he can then lose again. So all that being said, right? So I went into a whole, like, a bit of analysis, broad strokes there. So Ellie is in the house. She's at the shower. Maria's left her a bunch of stuff, clothes and some medical sanitary items, I'll just say. And she goes across the street to their place and sees the names Kevin and Sarah with, like, you know, it's just a little memorial on the wall above the fireplace. And Maria, like, says, "Oh, I noticed you looking at that," you know, and when she's cutting her hair, she's like, "Oh yeah, you know, I was a district attorney, I was a lawyer, but I always like cutting hair. I guess it was just the mum in me." And Ellie's like, "Oh, I'm sorry about your kids," and she's like, "No, just one kid. It was just Kevin. Sarah was Joel's daughter." First of all, it's really sweet that Tommy, you know, put his niece up next to Kevin, right? That's actually a really sweet thing. Like, I think Tommy's like a super likable character, particularly in the show. Not he's unlikable in the game, but like I feel like, you know, Gabriel Luna just is coming across as a very down to earth, likable guy, which contradicts or contrasts nicely with Joel. But it's really hard to pick because there's so many good moments of performance in this episode. But this moment on Bella Ramsey's face, like this just like silent reaction to the phrase Sarah was Joel's daughter, which she clearly did not know before this moment. And I never even thought about it, really. But clearly she didn't know that Joel had a daughter. And there's just this moment. And even Maria in the scene kind of realizes, oh, I've just said something. I've just said something that she didn't know. And it, you know, it goes wherever it goes. But like immediately there's just this kind of reaction, which I loved. Like I felt my heart sink in the moment with Ellie hearing this, and just kind of like her like just processing the ideas of like, this is why Joel is the way he is. She, you know, she even says that explains a lot about him, and I think at some level it does. So I love that moment. Loved it. She then goes to like their communal hall to watch a movie. They're watching a Richard Dreyfuss film. I didn't recognize it. I did look it up. I've forgotten what the title was now. But it was obvious which one it was. It was about he plays like a musician who moves in with like a single mother and their daughter. So he's kind of like this sort of surrogate father figure. And this is going off completely just by the IMDb description. But it doesn't take like a rocket scientist to figure out that obviously there's a reason why that movie was chosen, just in terms of the parallels of there being a new father figure in a teenage girl's life, or maybe I think she's a bit younger than that, but regardless, like that was there. And probably someone working on the movie likes that particular movie, because there's tons of movies that have those themes in it. There's tons to pick from. Someone probably liked this, / it was easy to get the rights to because of who owned it, is my guess. Meaning Warner Brothers, because they're, HBO. But it's very notable that in this scene, like, I again, the performance from Bella Ramsey really showed that Ellie was uncomfortable, or not uncomfortable, that's not the right word, but she stood out. She's amongst all these kids. It's like Maria's put her here with all these other kids to like entertain her. Hey, you should do a normal kid thing. Here, watch a movie. And she's sitting in the middle of all these other kids, and they're all watching the movie and smiling and paying attention. And it's just another example of what I said earlier, where Ellie, she's too different from these kids because of how she's, from her experience, because of how she's been raised. It's particularly these last few months, I suppose, more than anything. But she's grown up so much compared to these other kids that she just feels out of place. And it's kind of that thing, like, I don't know, not everyone's experienced this, maybe, I don't know, but I think if you're, maybe this, I don't know if this is more relatable if you've got siblings or less relatable, but, because I'm an only child. And to me, what this moment felt like was when I was a kid and I was like put with someone who was younger, like, so I'd be maybe 12 and I'd be put with like a 7-year-old or something in that sort of age range, maybe even less than that. But because you're both technically kids and you're at some sort of event where it's mostly adults, you get kind of lumped with the other kids, but you feel like you're too old to be around the other kids. And it just kind of feels awkward and out of place, and it doesn't work, right? You just feel not quite right. The reason why I'm saying maybe that's more relatable as an only child is because maybe if you have younger siblings, you're just kind of used to having younger kids around. So maybe that weird feeling's not quite as there, maybe, I don't know. But that's what this made me think of. That's what made me feel like. And yeah, so she feels, it's like Maria's trying to like just sort of put her into like the you're just a kid kind of hole. Not in a bad way. She gives her some good advice. She says, the only people who can betray you are the ones you trust. And she's really kind of like saying, she's really implying a lot of bad things about Joel. And Ellie sticks up for him. Ellie wants to root for Joel, of course, because she's bonded with him. And while this is going on, Joel is trying to fix his shoe. We've seen him duct taping it earlier in the episode, and Tommy comes in, and again, this is just a great other little example. And there's a few of these in this episode, actually. This is the first one. Of Joel thinking he has to solve something on his own, only for Tommy. In fact, Ellie does it earlier on with the standing guard, I suppose, so that was technically another example. But even just between Joel and Tommy, there's like 3 examples of Joel thinking he has to solve something on his own, and then Tommy just hands him a better option. It's this idea that Joel doesn't think he's going to have help from anyone, and doesn't know to expect it or ask for it. And Tommy just brings in a fresh pair of boots and says, here you go, here's new shoes. And it's just kind of like, it's a perfect, picture to paint of the way Joel thinks versus the way Tommy thinks. As Tommy's in this world now where people are looking out for each other, and Joel is still in this mentality of I need to survive on my own, and I can only get things if I like bargain for them, or if I trade for them, or if I possibly even threaten for them. And his brother's like, no, I've got you, here's some shoes, an act of kindness. But this is the scene where Joel breaks down. This is the scene where he admits that Ellie's infected, but she's immune, and says that, he's seen her be bit. Tommy has a second where he's like, am I going to go and tell everyone and freak out? But he believes his brother, sits down and says, take it from the start. I loved how it cut to Ellie looking for Joel during this speech. It cut to her outside in the main sort of like street, looking for him, which also is important because we find out she hears some of this a little bit later. But Joel talks about what's happened in the story and all that stuff. But the big stuff though is he wants Tommy to take her instead of him, because he feels like he's going to fail, and he feels like he's going to fail because Ellie has already had to kill someone to save him. That happened in episode 4 when they arrived in the city. Ellie had to, shoot the guy who was on top of him, right? He was going to lose, and Ellie had to save him, and he feels like he's failed because of that, because she's 14 and she had to kill someone, and he feels guilty about that, which I think is, like, as much as Joel can be an asshole at times, that's a very sympathetic and relatable thing to say, is that he feels bad for that, and it shows you that he does have this moral compass deep down, even if he has done bad things in the past, and he's willing to go further than other people. But he's like, yeah, I'm deaf. I'm going deaf enough that I couldn't hear the guy coming. She had to save me, and talks about how he's having nightmares, and he doesn't remember them, but he just wakes up and he feels like he's lost something. And I'm already thinking he's talking about his daughter, and he then specifically says, "That's all I've done for 20 years is fail her." I think that's the line that he says. And that really hit. And this is all new stuff in the show. This entire speech is completely new as far as I can remember. I don't... That's the vulnerable side of Joel breaking down, and this fear of failure, which ties in perfectly to, back to Bill and Frank and the "until you showed up, I was never afraid of anything." But now he's got someone to lose, so now he's scared about that. This idea that Joel already feels this emotional about possibly failing Ellie because he's going to fail again, and because he failed Sarah. It makes sense that this is the episode where we actually see him kind of think about her a bit more, and we have these moments where he thinks he sees her. Later on, we see actually her face properly, probably for the first time since episode 1. I don't know if we've just had a straight up shot of her face since then. So it's almost like him even thinking about her this, like, overtly is kind of a big deal, because he's been kind of avoiding it, or he usually does avoid it. So this all hit really hard, and Tommy, like, hearing all this, agrees to take Ellie. And this leads to the scene that I was anticipating all season, is the scene after this. The scene where Joel goes into the bedroom and Ellie's sitting there reading the diary. This scene is out of the game. Most of the dialogue is the same as the game, with some little touches here or there that are slightly different to fit the context that's a little different. How you get there in the game is very different. There's a whole, like, build up to it that's a little bit separate. It's not actually in Jackson, it's just kind of near Jackson. There's a whole thing. It doesn't matter though, because the reason why it's my favorite scene of the game is the dialogue. It's what's said in the scene. It's this idea that Ellie's heard that Joel's going to unload her onto Tommy, and she's hurt by that. She feels abandoned, and Joel tries to explain that it's for the best, and she brings up Sarah. She says, "I found out about Sarah, but I'm not her." And Joel, like, his demeanor, like, the performances here are fantastic. He just says, "Not another word. You don't talk about her." And what I love about it is that I think Ellie, like, really saves it in the moment where she's like, "Okay, I won't talk about her, but, like, everyone else I've known has left me or died except you." And she shoves him, and like, I love that line in the game. I love it here in the show. Her delivery was fantastic. And then Joel hits her back with the cold, "You're right. You're not my daughter, and I'm sure as hell not your dad." Love those scenes, those lines of dialogue. And just to explain why I love this scene so much, and it's captured perfectly in the show. The performances are great. It landed hard, and I felt the emotions that I did. The reason why I love this so much, particularly, and why it's so special to me from the game, is because this was the first scene in a video game that ever made me feel emotions, basically. Like, I enjoyed video games for many years before The Last of Us came out. And probably the most, like, connected to characters was Naughty Dog's own other game, the Uncharted video games. Like, I sort of really liked those characters, and, really get into the story in a way, particularly in Uncharted 2 and 3 before this one, that was different from games of the past. But games typically had sillier stories. Even my favorite game series, Resident Evil, the story's silly. Like, it's not like, it's not prestige storytelling by any means. And I didn't necessarily know that a game could make me feel something the way that The Last of Us did. And the reason why this scene in particular hits me is because this is the one where I, like, I was enjoying the game, I was really into the story up until this point, but this is the scene where I kinda, like felt the hit. Like I felt a gut punch. The lines of dialogue that were being said between Joel and Ellie, from both of them. Which is the great thing about the scene, is that both of them back to back like hit you with these lines that feel like they're really unearthing the core problems that each character has, and kind of really just bring it to the light, and it feels genuine because everything's been building up to this confrontation. I just didn't know that a game would ever be able to do that to me, and it did. Like I was left like my mouth was like I was in awe. I was in awe when I played that scene in the game. I was gobsmacked by it. So I was really excited to get to it here. I knew it had to be in here. Whatever the context was going to be to get there, it had to be here. And if anything, it was enhanced because it had this sort of touching scene with Joel right beforehand where he kind of opens up to his brother about what his fears are and how he's putting on this tough act towards the end of this scene has this new extra layer of context because he's, we know he feels scared, but he's acting tough here. And he's sort of deflecting by being tough and doing this. And when he goes to bed, he has this little memory of Sarah and specifically of putting an ornament on a Christmas tree. Again, this world that he thought was long gone and left behind, he commented on the Christmas tree earlier in the episode that they have a Christmas tree in Jackson, and now he's remembering something. Probably, he's probably not thought about a happy Christmas memory in a long ass time, at least in the context of it being related to something that's going on. And here he is thinking about his daughter at Christmas because, like, this entire conversation, what he's seen today, is making him think of that world, and probably partly why he's so on edge and being so deflective and confrontational, but also his emotions are coming to the forefront because all of this world that he's in, sort of like having to kind of stick up for Ellie or realizing what he wants to do with Ellie, is all just like bringing all these feelings to the surface. It's wonderful stuff. Like all of this just was hitting back to back really, really well. Like as soon as they get to Jackson, all the way up till they leave Jackson, I was just in love with everything the episode was doing, writing and like characters wise. It's wonderful stuff. So Ellie gets up the next morning. She's sitting there waiting with her stuff. Tommy comes to get her, and Joel's already in the stable, and he mentions that he was going to steal the horse, which was my second example of Tommy just saying, I would have just given it to you if you asked. Which again, much like the shoes, he thinks he has to steal it, but he doesn't. And he's like, no, I came here to steal a horse half an hour ago, but I'm still here. And I'm pretty sure this is completely new as well, is the way he says this, where he says, you should have a choice. I still think you're better off with Tommy. There's kind of a similar moment in the game, but I think the lines of dialogue are different, but I love the way Ellie doesn't even let him finish the sentence. She just like shoves her bag at him and says, let's go. She is delighted that he has chosen her. And maybe for the first time in a long time in her life, someone has chosen her in a situation. That kind of feeds into what she was saying before, is that everyone either leaves her or dies. But Joel has chosen her. He's chosen to stick with her when he had his out. He'd made his out. He was going to leave her with Tommy, and he chose to stay with her. Like her happiness of this is evident in the moment. The last example of Tommy giving him something that Joel thought he had to make a bigger argument for was his rifle. He says, hey, can I have that rifle? And Tommy's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, because Maria took mine. He's like, I already said yes. Yeah, which actually I really love the progression of that, is like compare it to the other two examples. Here he does ask for the help, Tommy gives him the help, and then Joel still feels like he has to add something on after the fact, but he at least got to the point where he just asked for it rather than, I don't know, punching his brother and taking the gun while he was down. Like that's what Joel might have done earlier on in the episode, but he's grown a little bit by the end. So I really appreciate that. So but yeah, her happiness and his happiness, that's the great thing about this next little montage of them. Like, he finally gives in and trains her how to shoot the rifle, which has got a great line of dialogue where he's talking about, pulling the trigger softly and gently like you love it, and Ellie says, are you trying to, like, shoot it or impregnate it? And just a fun little, again, Ellie with the wisecracks is always entertaining. She's been great throughout the whole show. But they're walking, they're laughing. At one point, she leans her head on his back, and it's very loving, and he's smiling. And that's it. Even the dialogue in that scene is great, where she's asking about his past, and he talks about how he was a contractor, and she's like, the contractor. She says it like he's like a, almost like you're talking about a Liam Neeson movie, like, the Protector or something like that. No, there's a movie called, there's a movie called that, but it's not Liam Neeson. And he has that really funny line where he says, yeah, we were cool. Everyone in love contractors. That was a funny line. And he smiles after he says it, and she's hugging him. Like, the bonding's high. Obviously, from a storytelling perspective, if you've ever read or watched a story of any kind, you're like, they're too happy. Something bad is probably about to happen. And they get to the university. They see the monkeys. They're still bantering and bonding, where Joel reveals that he actually wanted to be a singer when he was younger, and that she makes him promise to sing her a song when she saved the world. But they go into the building, and it's clear the Fireflies were here, but they've left. And they look around a little bit. They hear some noises. It looks like they've went to Salt Lake City, I think the city was, and they need to go there. That gives them the next destination. But right as they're saying this, there's some people outside. There's some raiders who are very threatening, and they try to sneak away and get back out of the horse. One guy comes up, though, and fights Joel. And Joel wins, but he gets stabbed in the process. And they rush away on the horse. But at the end of the episode, Joel falls off the horse, and Ellie's pleading, please don't die, I can't do this without you, that kind of thing. And then we get a cover of the song that played at the end of episode 2, which I believe was sung by the creator, Craig Mazin. His daughter is the vocalist on this. So as of right now, I don't think you can go and listen to a full version of this cover. I don't even know if a full version will ever exist. It might just be this section you hear at the end of the episode, but it was a really nice little moment. I think it worked really well because we learned obviously back in episode 2 that 80s music meant danger, so the idea that they're playing the same song again but in a much more sad tone tells us that we're getting to a really dangerous part of the season and a part of the story. I think that's quite smart. So no, that was great stuff. I loved this episode. I think everything it did with these characters and their reactions, like when they get to Jackson and Ellie's acting a little bit like worried that Joel's got his brother now, so he doesn't need her, and she's worried that she's going to be abandoned, and then she almost is abandoned, but not for that exact reason, but that's what she's thinking at the time. Joel tried to say, no, me and Ellie have been fine, we've been doing okay. Everything's been great. Life's not been shit. Like, he doesn't want to let Tommy think that his life is much better than his, and it's almost like this. Again, I don't think it's kind of egotistical thing. I mean, maybe it's like a type of ego, but it's not. I think it's a very specific thing to them because his ego's hurt. So I suppose it is egotistical, but it's very specific rather than just like I want the big shot kind of thing. This is kind of shaking his entire world that this is even possible. He's very cynical about it, and it's notable that Tommy does say when they're leaving that there's a place there for them, for both of them. So that's important going forward as well. Yeah, loved it. Like, honestly, all the character interactions were so good that I think the character drama is maybe what the show is its strongest at. Like, the horror stuff is great. The clickers have been great when we've had them, but they've been very reserved with them. And what I think is very interesting is going forward is that I'm not even sure like where they might even put like infected and clickers into in the last 3 episodes, because I'm thinking of what's coming up, and I'm not like they could given like how little they've had of them, they could just not have any for the rest of the season. But I suspect that they're probably going to want to have some in an episode, just because it would maybe feel a bit weird if we only had like clickers really twice in the entire season. So I'll be curious to see where they choose to put in like a set piece in with the clickers and the infected somewhere in the last few episodes. Obviously there's tons of them still in the game, but like they've taken out so much from the game because it's not it's a TV show. It's not a game where you're constantly having to be in combat. So I'll be very curious to see what they do with that. Yeah, so super excited. I think I do want to give another spoiler warning just briefly to talk about some game stuff. So for people who have only watched the show and don't want to know anything from the games, by all means, thanks for watching. I'll see you for the next episode. But spoilers for the game. Spoilers for the game. Technically games, because I'm not going to spoil anything in the second game, but there's a few things in this that are kind of foreshadowed. Obviously, Jackson itself looks more like the version of the town in the second game. In the games, it's only kind of like, it's much smaller in the first game, and then it becomes kind of this town in the second game. Here, they've just went straight to the full town. The name of the horse from the second game is mentioned at the stable. The girl who was looking at Ellie, like a lot of people are theorizing that that's Dina from the second game, and I would not be surprised. It feels quite likely, to be honest. That was a little nugget, a little Easter egg going forward. There was another one that made I thought of the second game. There was something else. There was one more thing, but yeah, there's a few of those things kind of sprinkled out. One of the things I want to talk about though in this episode, as far as like game spoilers goes though, is again going to the end of the game, which is Joel is going to go on a bloodbath tirade to save Ellie from the Fireflies when he realizes that they're going to kill her to, you know, try and make this cure. So the two things that I thought of is that one, I think him going like full murder man that was a horrible sentence. Yeah, I think when I do expect he's still going to go on a rampage to save her in the last episode, and I think it's going to be really exciting. I think that's even more impactful now because we know he feels like he can't like be this perfect guy anymore or this perfect warrior. The idea that he thinks he's going to fail, I think it's going to mean more when he does go on this, you know, whether you agree with his decision to do so or not is another question, but I think it's going to be more impactful that he sort of like does go into like I don't know, assassin mode effectively. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. He turns out the Terminator, but like him doing that, I think is a little bit more weight to it now. After we think he's not going to be able to save her, that she's going to end up dead if she stays with him, and it also drives the idea that he's going to in part do that because he's so scared of failing again. It's not just that he's bonded with Ellie and wants to protect her. It's like this would be a second failure, a second child that he failed. So I think that's really cool as a just again making something matter more that was already there in the story. They've added more to it in a really smart way. And the other thing I wanted to mention about all that is that again, this idea that someone you trust is the one who can betray you is, you know, it's a kind of a thing at the end where he's going to lie to Ellie about like what he did or about like what the possibilities of things were, and that's kind of set up with that line of dialogue in this. In fact, there was another line of dialogue like that. Oh yeah, it was the dam where, you know, after she says the joke about it being damn, Joel says, "Oh, don't ask me how this makes electricity. I don't know." Ellie says, "You could have just made something up and I'd have believed you." That also kind of foreshadows the end of the story as well. So yeah, it's like a couple of little things there. That's a smaller little foreshadowing thing, but I think the even raising like the character motivation for why he's going to go full nuclear when he does in that last part of the story is really good stuff. So anyway, that is my thoughts on The Last of Us episode 6. It's a wonderful episode. Tommy and Maria were great. I thought every scene with Tommy and Joel was fantastic. I thought Ellie and Maria was a great scene. I thought every scene with Joel and Ellie was fantastic. Funny couple at the start as well was really entertaining. I was like, wonderful stuff. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Get us on the Twitters at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. Although, with the way Twitter's going, that might not be a location that I refer you to too much longer. With this extortion for two-factor authentication being a thing that it might be happening. But anyway, yeah, if you want to support all the content, head over to patreon.com/mailfuzztv. You can support us on a regular basis to keep all the content coming, or of course you can do a super thanks on YouTube as a one-time thing if that's more your jam. But thank you very much to everyone who supports the show. We'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?